You guys always seem to love the videos where I break down a recruiting class and talk about what happened to certain players and prospects. In today's video, we're going to go all the way back to 2019, which is 5 years ago. I know, it's crazy, time's going by fast, but we're going to go back and talk about the top 10 recruits from that year and go through what ended up happening to each and every one of them. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about what happened to the top 10 recruits from the 2019 recruiting class. So we're going to be using 24/7 Sports for this, as I think they are the best recruiting site, and I quickly want to talk about some of the other 5-stars who were in that class. The 2019 5-stars included players like Evan Neal, who ended up being a top 10 pick, Garrett Wilson, who's a star, George Karlaftis, who's a star, Darnell Wright, who was a top 10 pick, Nakobe Dean, who was a high draft pick, Kyle Hamilton, who was a star, and then a couple of busts like John Emery Jr., Trey Sanders, Baylor Cupp, and Jaden Hazelwood. Obviously, we could do a whole breakdown on all the 5-stars, but we don't have time for that today, so we're going to go ahead and get started with number 10, and that was Brew McCoy. Brew McCoy has had a long, winding journey that has gotten him to this point. He's currently in his 6th year at Tennessee and is one of their better wide receivers, as he's caught 14 passes for 209 yards. At one point, though, Brew McCoy was the next big thing. Coming out of modern-day high school in the state of California, he was at one point ranked as the number 2 overall player in the country, and as a junior, he caught 78 passes for 1,428 yards and 18 touchdowns. Combining that with his excellent frame and his insane speed, Brew McCoy was seen as a future NFL star, and he would decide to commit to USC. Except things would get weird. He would then go to Texas, and then would once again be released from his national letter of intent and went back to USC. There was a whole drama with that, and I remember doing a video on that back in 2020, but yeah, after it all got sorted out, he would arrive as a freshman in 2019. He would not get his first snaps until 2020 though, as alongside Keaton Slovis, McCoy would end up catching 21 passes for 236 yards and 2 touchdowns. Going into the 2021 season, Brew McCoy would not end up playing at all, as I guess he ended up redshirting, and then he would join an excellent receiving core at Tennessee in 2022. Guys like Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt were on the roster, and McCoy was the clear third option. He ended up catching 52 passes for 667 yards and 4 touchdowns, and was an explosive part of that Volunteers offense. Going into 2023, him and Ramel Keaton were supposed to be the main guys, but unfortunately Brew McCoy would deal with some difficulty. After catching 17 passes for 217 yards and a touchdown, McCoy would end up suffering a serious injury as he dislocated his right ankle against South Carolina, and he was out for the rest of the year. He ultimately would get a medical redshirt and would come back for a 6th season, and so far in 2024, he's caught 14 passes for 209 yards, but has yet to catch a touchdown. He's fallen behind a little bit on the depth chart, as at one point I would have expected Brew McCoy to be a number 1 receiver, but sadly because of injuries and because of just difficult situations, Brew McCoy has not exactly panned out. To say he's been a mega bust would be a stretch, but he definitely has not lived up to being the number 10 recruit in the country, and we'll see if he gets a shot in the NFL. Honestly, I don't know how many times I've talked about Spencer Rattler on this channel, but coming in at number 9, Spencer Rattler was ranked as the number 1 pro-style quarterback and the 9th best recruit in the country. Coming out of Pinnacle High School, he was seen as the next big thing, as during his time there, he ended up passing for over 11,000 yards with 116 touchdowns, and he also ran for over 1,000 yards and 14 scores. He decided to commit to Oklahoma over Bama, Texas, Notre Dame, and USC, and was seen as the next big thing behind Kyler Murray. He would not end up playing at all in 2019, as he would just sort of be a redshirt backup, but in 2020, he'd end up taking over for the Sooners. He was named the National Freshman of the Year by CBS Sports, and that was after he ended up passing for 3,031 yards with 28 touchdowns and 7 picks. Going into 2021, many expected him to be a Heisman contender, if not win the award, but after struggling throughout the first half of the season and getting booed against West Virginia, he'd be benched in favor of Caleb Williams in the Red River game, and Williams would essentially take over from there. Rattler was now in a difficult spot, and he'd have to bring his 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns with him across the country to South Carolina. He'd sign up to play for head coach Shane Beamer, where in his first year starting for the Gamecocks, he'd throw for 3,026 yards with 18 touchdowns and 12 interceptions, and this included 2 huge victories over a top 10 Tennessee team and a top 10 Clemson team. This was huge for his legacy, and he decided to come back for one more year in 2023. In total, he'd throw for 3,200 yards with 19 touchdowns and 8 picks, and while he got better, he still wasn't seen as a day 1 prospect like many people expected. Ultimately, though, he'd be taken in the 5th round with pick number 150 by the New Orleans Saints, and right now he is set to start this upcoming Sunday. I'm not sure when this video will be released, as it may come before or after his performance, but I'm wishing Rattler the best of luck as he's gotten to the point where he is now starting in the NFL, and I guess that's exactly what he was supposed to do coming out of high school. He just took a different path to get there. At number 8, we had the first offensive tackle, and that was Charles Cross. Coming out of Laurel High School in Mississippi, Charles Cross was seen as a generational type offensive lineman as he brought his 6'5", 270-pound frame to Mississippi State. This was honestly kind of shocking as he probably could have gone to a much bigger school, but I guess he just wanted to go to Mississippi State. After redshirting in 2019, he would start in both 2020 and 2021. He became one of the best left tackles in the SEC conference, and honestly I don't know how to grade offensive linemen too well, but all the scouts and all the sites were super high on him, so he eventually became a top 10 pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. He was taken with pick number 9 to the Seattle Seahawks, where he started all 17 games for the Seahawks in 2022 and appeared and started in all 14 games in 2023, and I assume the same is going on for him this year so far. Ranked right in front of Charles Cross was another offensive lineman by the name of Logan Brown. He ended up being ranked as the number 7 recruit in the class of 2019, and at 6'6" and 305 pounds, Brown was a huge deal. He actually went to the same high school as Mozzie Smith, the future Michigan and Cowboys star, and Brown blew up. He pretty much had the perfect frame for a next-level offensive lineman and would actually decide to commit to Wisconsin. This was a huge deal, as Wisconsin was known for developing talent, but never did they get top 10 recruits like that. In 2019, he did not see any playing time as he redshirted, and then would finally appear in 7 games in 2020. In 2021, he'd get a little bit better, playing in all 13 games, and then would finally make 3 starts in 2022. Okay, so if you can't figure it out by now, he hasn't really done much throughout his first 4 years at Wisconsin, so he decides to make a decision to transfer. He would decide to transfer across the country to Kansas as they were starting to rise up under Lance Leipold and would actually appear in their first 2 games. From there, it looks like he did not do a whole lot, and it looks like this season he is at least still starting for KU, and maybe he'll make it to the NFL, but right now things look a little bit unlikely, and the Logan Brown story has unfortunately been a disappointment. We'll still have to wait and see though, as maybe things will change. At number 6, we have Kavon Tibido. He ended up going to Oaks Christian High School in California, and this guy was a monster. He did transfer around a couple of times during his high school career, but after being named the USA Today High School Defensive Player of the Year, he'd have 18 sacks and 54 tackles during his senior season. In total, Tibido had over 152 tackles and 54 sacks, plus 8 forced fumbles during his time in high school, and would commit to play at Oregon. Tibido would then have a great career at the Ducks, as in 2019, he finished with 35 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 9 sacks. In 2020, he finished with 38 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 3 sacks. And then in 2021, in his make-or-break year, he had a career-high 49 tackles, 7 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. This was all while teams were trying to scheme around him, and everyone knew he was going to be a star in the NFL, but some did question his motor, which is why some believe he fell to pick number 5. Ultimately, he get taken at pick number 5 with the New York Giants, and so far in his NFL career, in his first 2 seasons combined, he's played in 31 games, has 99 tackles, 5 forced fumbles, and 15.5 sacks. So far in 2024, it looks like he's been sidelined with some sort of wrist injury, but Tibido is one of the better young defensive linemen in the NFL and has 100% lived up to his hype coming out of high school and deserved to be ranked at number 6, if not higher. At number 5, we have one of the more interesting players from the 2019 recruiting class, as we have Trayvon Walker. Scouts were split on him. 24/7 Sports ranked him at number 5, but on their composite he was listed at number 22. That's what makes things interesting. Well, coming out of Upson Lee High School in Georgia, he ended up blowing up late in the recruiting process and became a 5-star recruit who would sign with Georgia. Walker would end up playing a little bit in 2019 as he had 15 total tackles with 1 pass deflection and 2.5 sacks. In 2020, he would regress, finishing with 13 tackles, 1 pass deflection, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble. And then in 2021, he was given a ton of hype. Walker would end up finishing with 37 tackles, 2 pass deflections, and 6 sacks. He'd end up declaring for the 2022 NFL Draft after winning a national championship, and because of his crazy athleticism and crazy potential, some scouts for some reason believed he could go number 1 overall. I thought that was a pipe dream, but it would end up happening, as yes, Jacksonville would take him with the number 1 overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. So far in 2.5 seasons, Walker has 119 tackles, 18.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. While some people believe that Trayvon Walker has kind of been a bust, I think the better way to describe him is that he continues to go under the radar. I feel like he's the least talked about number 1 overall pick in NFL history, as he may not be the number 1 player in the league, but he's definitely not bad either, and is still getting better. For a guy whose scouts were split on coming out of high school, he's done a great job, and he's put a lot of people to rest, and good for Trayvon Walker. At number 4, we have Nolan Smith. Coming out of IMG Academy, Nolan was a huge deal. But originally he actually started his high school career at Calvin Day School, which is located in Savannah, Georgia, And over the course of the next couple of years, Smith would finish with 88 tackles, 10.5 sacks, and an interception. At one point, he was ranked as the #1 player in the country, and 24/7 Sports actually has him listed as the 20th best of all time, and many believed he was the second coming of Khalil Mack. He spent his 1 year at IMG Academy before he would eventually arrive at Georgia with obviously a ridiculous amount of hype. The Georgia Bulldogs had been pumping defensive linemen into the NFL, and Smith was next up. He finished with 18 tackles and 2.5 sacks in 2019, had 22 tackles and 2.5 sacks in 2020, and 55 tackles and 3.5 sacks in 2021. Okay, his first 3 years honestly were a little bit underwhelming, as many were waiting for him to break out. Sadly, that wasn't really happening much, but in 2022, he would start to figure things out. Through the first couple of games, he finished with 18 tackles, 3 sacks, and 1 pass deflection, but unfortunately he'd end up tearing a pec muscle, and this would end his season in the month of October. After running the second fastest defensive lineman time since 2003 in the 40-yard dash, the Eagles would decide to take him in the first round, as he would go at pick number 30 in the 2023 NFL Draft, and so far with the Eagles, he's been pretty solid. He's played in a total of 21 games, has 28 tackles, and 1 sack. So far, the jury has said that he's kind of been underwhelming and should not have been taken with that 30th overall pick, and honestly, I still agree. He had never had that great of production, and he also had that injury, and I think he was honestly drafted that high because of his potential and the fact that playing with that Georgia defense seems to move you up around. Still though, Nolan did end up making it in the first round and making it to the NFL, just like we all expected coming out of high school. At number 3, we have Demarvin Leo. He was a defensive tackle, and he ended up going to Texas A&M. He ended up being born in San Antonio, Texas, and would eventually go to Judson High School, where as a junior, he had a monster stat line of 83 tackles, 16 TFLs, 6 sacks, 6 pass breakups, 4 forced fumbles, and a blocked punt. Because of that and insane athleticism, Leo was a 5-star, and he ended up going to Texas A&M. This was a huge get for the Aggies, and in 2019, Leo would finish with 38 tackles with 2 sacks. In 2020, he'd improve upon those numbers, finishing with 37 tackles, 3 pass deflections, a forced fumble, and 2.5 sacks to go alongside an interception. 2021 would end up being his best season yet, as with the Aggies, he finished with 58 tackles, 2 pass deflections, 8.5 sacks, and a forced fumble. Because of that, he was named a consensus All-American and would decide to give up his last year of eligibility and go into the 2022 NFL Draft. Instead of being a first-round pick like most 5-stars were, he ended up going in the 3rd round with pick number 84, as he was taken by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So far in his time with the Steelers, Leo has played in 28 games, has 1 sack, and a total of 4 pass deflections. Definitely those sack numbers are not where we expected them to be, and for now, Demarvin Leo needs to figure things out, as he is injured, and we'll see what the rest of his career looks like. To say he's a bust would be too far, but to say he's hit on being the number 3 overall recruit would also be a stretch. At number 2, we have Stingley Jr. This guy was hyped up for years as going into LSU, as he was always expected to be the next big thing, as his father ended up playing in the Arena League and his grandfather played with the New England Patriots. Because football was in his blood, he'd end up becoming a huge deal at the Dunman School in Baton Rouge, where he would have 27 career interceptions, was named the Louisiana Gatorade Player of the Year, and would decide to commit to LSU. Stingley would do a little bit of everything when he arrived at LSU in 2019, as he would play on defense, occasionally on offense, and in special teams. In 2019 as a freshman, he had 38 tackles and an insanely high 15 pass deflections. He also had 6 interceptions, and when people threw the ball Stingley's way, they paid for it. In 2020, his numbers would dip a bit as he finished with 27 tackles, 5 pass deflections, and 1 forced fumble, and did not get an interception. In 2021, he'd then have 8 tackles and 1 forced fumble, but that was apparently because he was injured, and then he would declare for the 2022 NFL Draft, where he was taken with the 3rd overall pick in the first round by the Houston Texans. So far in his 3-year career in the NFL, he has a total of 86 tackles, 1 sack, 18 pass deflections, and 6 interceptions. He's also played in 21 games, and while there have been a couple of injuries, for the most part, Stingley has lived up to the hype, and he could be getting better and better as time goes on in the league. Stingley had an incredible start at LSU, and ended up being a little bit underwhelming by the time he left Baton Rouge, but he's seemingly figured out in the league, and he still has the potential to be one of the better defensive backs in the National Football League. Oh boy, at number 1 we have Antonio Alfano. Many of you guys probably don't even know who this guy is, but he was listed as the number 1 player in the country as a defensive end. Alfano was born in the state of New Jersey, but eventually would transfer a couple of times during his high school career. Because of his insane stats and measurables, he was ranked as the top player in the class of 2019, and eventually chose Alabama over Notre Dame, LSU, Florida, Miami, Ohio State, and pretty much every other school you could possibly think of. His time at Bama would get off to a rocky start, as he was absent from class and practices for unspecified reasons, and they apparently apparently they said that's because his grandmother was ill at the time. Just a couple of weeks later, he would decide to enter the transfer portal and then would follow Mel Tucker over to Colorado. Nick Saban later said that Alfano basically quit on the team and he never played a game for the Crimson Tide. 1 month after he officially enrolled at Colorado though, Mel Tucker would take the Michigan State job and his position coach at Colorado would take a coaching job at Tennessee. It was then reported that Alfano was no longer a member of that football team, and then he ended up going to Independence Community College but never saw time there. He then went to Lackawanna College in Pennsylvania, the same school that Kevin White went to, and ended up playing in 5 games in that one. Alfano did absolutely nothing in his time in college, and then would eventually be taken in the 8th round in the Canadian Football League draft. And I don't know if we've ever seen a number 1 overall recruit not take 1 snap at the college level. To me, this is really sad, and I'm definitely going to do a video on him here at some point. But yeah, today we talked about the top 10 recruits from the class of 2019 and where they are now. To do a quick recap, 7 of the top 10 guys were actually drafted, 2 of them are still trying to revitalize their careers in Brew McCoy and Logan Brown at both Kansas and Tennessee, and then the number 1 overall guy ended up not doing anything and is currently playing up in Canada. What's crazy is we actually got 3 players who were drafted in the top 5, another top 10 pick, a potential franchise quarterback in New Orleans, and then a couple more rotational pieces. This was definitely an interesting class, and I hope you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did though, be sure to leave a like, let me know what year I should cover next, and also don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about what happened to the top 10 recruits from the class of 2020. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.